Good day to everyone. I am so glad you're here. This is Nanette Saylor, and we are here for another episode of the Create.Play.Live podcast, where women come together to let their curiosity lead them to extraordinary lives. And I am absolutely thrilled to be bringing you a special guest today. Judith Tamarah is going to tell us all about her experience with transforming spaces. And I think you will find it particularly interesting to hear her talk about how she has woven all of her life's experience into this particular area of focus. It's actually interesting that she is one of the few guests that I have interviewed so far who is working in an area that she studied in early in life and has continued to follow this trajectory through her life's experience. So welcome, Judith. I am so glad you're here. Please introduce yourself to the group and tell us about this transformational space idea.
I'm Judith, and I have been studying this for, the connection between material and its transformational aspect for almost as long as I can remember. I started sewing when I was 7, and then I moved into being an artist. When I was in school, I studied anthropology and religious studies. I went into channeling after I got out of school. Became a graphic designer and continued as an artist, and then I went back to school and got my interior architecture degree. When you say I've woven all of those aspects, it has been this thing where I have, just as I've continued to explore the issue, more and more questions come up, and so I've followed that route and this route and so forth and so on, and it's always been a very natural process, and I've always felt like I was always kind of at the edge of the next question, which was a very satisfying place for me to be. So
Not interesting, because I love this idea that you're at the edge of the next question, because for me, asking and answering the right questions is exactly how my life has taken the path that it's taken. And I think that that's true for so many of us. And there's a practice, isn't there, in this asking of questions. And that's the thing that led me to really give attention to what makes us curious. How do we, and then how do we follow that curiosity? So are there any particular questions you're asking right now that are fueling your next exploration?
Yeah, well, the thing that I've been focusing on for the last maybe 8 to 10 years, but even more so right now, is how our physical environments affect us, how it transforms us, how it changes us, and specifically how, this sounds sort of romantic, but how it releases our soul. So one of the two areas that I get really fascinated with are this experience that I've had with myself and I've seen with others, where you're touching on a quality of your essence. And as we get older, at least for me, as I've gotten older, I've had less and less patience with blocking that essence from the world, right? And there's a real expansive feeling, when you're seeing other people do this beautiful, transformative process where they're more themselves each day. It's a release of energy, I feel, into the world, and it's transformative for everyone in the world. And so that's one fascination that's been with me my entire life. And then how do I use environment? How do we use our physical environment to create a space in which this happens, in which we're supported over and over again in doing this? And so those two pieces, where I can create an environment that allows someone to be more of themselves, is as juicy as you get for me. It's like, what's going to happen if I bring this in? And what happens when I bring that in? And when I'm working with a person, when I'm creating their design, because I also love materials. I mean, I love textiles and tiles and colors and all that sort of stuff. when I'm working with a design, I'm pulling these elements in, and I'm sort of tracking at the same time how that is affecting a person's energy. When I bring this color in, can I feel their energy expand? When I bring this color in, do I feel it contract? And so that is really the essence of how I create on the intuitive level an environment that is transformative for a particular person. Then there's another aspect, which is the very practical side, which I'm also trained in, and the design psychology side, which I'm certified in. So there's there's an intellectual and a psychological and a spiritual and a material, that all those pieces are there. So.
Isn't that interesting? A couple of things you said really caught my attention. One was the idea of it supporting our soul.
Mm-hmm.
And the other was this blossoming of essence over time, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And where my thoughts went immediately were to where are the places that essence gets blocked?
Exactly.
Can you speak a little bit to what you see as typical in some environments where people are blocking their essence?
Yeah, that's a big question, actually. It's very personal. I would say the two things that I see, and if I forget the second one, remind me. The two things that I see are people's resistance to taking up space. And the second thing is repeating patterns from their environment in the past that are constrictive.
Okay.
So repeating patterns of from their past. So we know that it's becoming more obvious in neuroscience as well. But we know that people tend to recreate environments of their past. Yeah. And this is a lot of my design psychology stuff. We create both, we draw in elements both of like negative environments and of positive environments, because we really imprint those, especially as we're young. Mm-hmm. And in those environments, patterns of behavior are also held. Our environments are like one of the biggest predictors of behavior, and along with that are predictors of beliefs and predictors of experience and emotions and feelings. So along with all that like materiality come the triggers of feeling the same way. And so what happens when I work with someone is we look at the negative ones, or what I call the ones that aren't really supporting you, and the positive ones, and we pull out, we make the positive ones be the dominant space, and we release the ones that are the not as supportive ones. And so that is the first place where I see essence being squished a little bit, is in this unconscious repeating of these patterns that don't hold us, don't tell us we're wonderful, don't tell us the story of us being the thing that we are, the person we are, the person that we want to be. The second one, which is taking up space, is actually, it's very interesting. I work more with women, and I work with women who are often entrepreneurs or creatives or visionaries or nurturers or healers, that sort of a person. And we tend, because I'm part of that group,
yes,
we tend to not put ourselves in our space. So you can imagine like a healing artist creating a beautiful environment for their clients,
yes,
but forgetting the support she or he needs for themselves. And I can give you a really good example if you'd like.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Because I think I immediately could understand that.
Yeah, and it's really, really common. And because it's about our power. When we step into that space, it's about our power and all the emotions that come up with being fully seen. And so I was working with this wonderful woman. She actually used to be the nanny of my kids when my kids were young. And she is just the most nurturing person in the world. And she opened not a daycare, but a play care up in Portland, Oregon, in Eugene. And she wanted me to look at the space. And I said, absolutely. And we did this like on the phone. So I do all my work online or virtually. And so she's describing, the cubbies she's made and the textures she's made and all this stuff that she has put into place for the experience of the children, which is awesome. It's wonderful that she's done that. And I'm look at her and I'm like, so Meg, where are you? Where are you in this thing? You know, she's moving herself into the basement so that the rest of the daycare center has some space.
Yes.
And I'm like, so we talked about putting the images that are important to her that, that reinforce it, remind her that she's this, person who loves the woods, this person who is expansive, the vision that she has. I took images and I told her, put them at eye level, your eye level, and the eye level of other teachers, because you need a special space for yourself within that space. When all these kids are asking for your energy and going, you need to remember who you are and come back to yourself for you to be able to serve them, really. So.
That's beautiful, beautiful. And I imagine that just those little touches, and the beautiful part about that story is that you didn't tell her she had to redesign the whole place. You just invited her to put some things up that were going to anchor for her.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful.
And that's a lot of what I do, is a little bit of problem solving.
Yeah.
And pointing out people's assumptions and the shoulds that they have and the blind spots that they have. And when I do create a design for a person, I try to keep it, because a lot of these people are very busy, I try to keep it like what I call 3 big moves, really implementable.
Yeah.
And I work with them on the moves that are going to be straightforward for them. So, for example, they might say at the beginning of working with them that I love this desk, I've been thinking about painting my wall, I'm not thrilled with these pieces of furniture, so forth and so on. And then I'll say, well, what you need to do is, this is the color you paint your wall.
Yes.
Rearrange your furniture like this and look for a new credenza or something like that. It's like, so 3 things that will make the biggest impact. And then I put a list of suggested over time changes that they can integrate as they see them come up in their life. And almost always what happens when you start becoming aware of what it is that really nourishes you, you start to see it, and then you start to bring it in a really organic way.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up, because visioning and vision boards and the idea of having these visual triggers is something that I give a lot of attention to, not only in my own life, but in my work with my clients too. That
awesome.
And this idea that, the things just magically start showing up, and because we're giving attention to it, we're asking to see it.
Yes.
And I think it's such a beautiful thing to share the gift of being able to invite people to the space of seeing that for themselves, right? Because so often, when we're in our day-to-day, it's very difficult, I've found, even for me, and I'm schooled and trained in this, and I lead people in it all the time. It's hard for me to step away enough to say and to check in on that specific level. So I am thrilled that we have connected, because I think there are some really dynamic ways that this notion of giving attention to the space that we're in all the time impacts our life, and so often, particularly as women, as givers, like you shared with the teacher story, we put everyone else first. We're more focused on, let's take this space that's going to be for public use and make it be just right for the public use. And, I'll get to mine later.
Yeah,
exactly. Which is never. Yeah. What came to mind for me was when I was moving and downsizing from our house, and we systematically went through every room and pared down and did that little exercise of love it, don't like it, get rid of it. And we only, because we were getting significantly smaller, only kept the things that we loved. The one space that really didn't get its full attention was my office. It was always left to the last. And so, of course, I ended up moving stuff that I really wouldn't have moved had I given it the same amount of attention that I gave everything else. And so as a result, it's taken me a lot longer to be comfortable in the space that is now my office, because I didn't do that exercise, and I'm really aware of it. And of course, now I've been here 2 years, and have I stopped to do the exercise? No, not really. So that's a conversation for another day. But I think it really does point out what it is that you're highlighting here, that it would serve us well to make this a priority and to give attention to our spaces.
Yeah.
So
and it's interesting because, part of me wants to say, well, if you look at, for us who are creative people, or we're working, like this is what supports us financially, it makes sense for us to start with our office, because that's the regenerative. I mean, I think that I'm one of those people, I think I said this to you once, I'm one of those people that if I don't create, I'll start breaking dishes, right?
Yes.
And that is very, I haven't broken a lot of dishes, but that is very true. It's like that is such an important part for me, to give it space, to physically give it space.
Yes.
And I have also found, because I work with a lot of people who are, driven entrepreneur type people, not only do they neglect their space, their office space, but they often neglect their nurturing spaces as well. Yes. So, sometimes I'll be working with a person and I'll say, well, because I focus primarily on office spaces, workspaces, and studios like that. But sometimes I'll say to the person, we could focus on your office, but we actually need to focus on your bedroom a little bit too. Yeah. Because you need that quality of rest and regeneration. Or it could be that they need a space where they have more connection with their family. And so it's like, I've given myself this, I do this program where basically I focus on one room, and that is in some ways a limit for myself. That's to say to myself, this is the box that you need to stay in a little bit, so that you're not, hopping around the house and making all these changes. And I think that when you change one room into alignment with yourself, the other rooms naturally start to go.
Yeah. So let's talk about the bedroom a little bit, because you and I had a conversation about how important sleep is. Right? When in preparing for these conversations, we always have a little bit of pre-dialogue about what's important and what works, and certainly what nurtures your creativity. And what came up in that early conversation for Judith and I was this idea that sleep is so important. And what I find amongst the creative community is, one, many of us are night owls. And then as a result, the amount of sleep that we get is limited. So talk to me a little bit about sleep and sleep and space and transformation and sleep and all of that good stuff for you.
Okay. Yeah, sleep is delicious to me. And I actually think it's part of a bigger need for me. My mother is an artist, and she's very good. Very, very good artist. She's 77. I'm like, you are hitting your peak, lady.
Yeah.
Amazing work. And so we were talking about, train of thought went off. I was talking to my daughter, who is also, she's a writer, and she has an artistic thing. And I was explaining to her that doing art is really 98% staring out the window. There's this huge, it's like that glacier thing. The peak is the little part that not the glacier, the iceberg. The peak's the little bit that you see above the water, but you need all that support underneath for that little part to stick up. Yeah. Sleep is one of them. Sleep is a big one for me. And I also include anything physical, anything nourishing and slow moving to the body, like slow yoga. And I've really been into doing, what is it? It's the Ayurvedic massage.
Where I don't know that.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And a friend of mine who's an Ayurvedic person explained it to me, and it's this slow nightly massage with coconut oil or sesame oil and maybe some essential oils.
Mm.
It just is like I do yoga and I do that, and I put earplugs in because my husband snores, and I put an eye mask on, and I'm like out,
Yes.
and that level of depth of sleep, I wake up and I'm so much more functional than if I skimp on it. That it's a
Yeah.
no-brainer. It's just a no-brainer for me to be able to do in 10 minutes, which if I wasn't rested and I'm cranky would take me 2 hours. And so it's really about feeding my roots, feeding my source, and giving it all that space and all that lusciousness that I possibly can. It's the best investment of time ever.
Yeah, and I think, thank you for sharing that, because that's where I think a lot of us go is, oh goodness, I can only, I only have 6 hours, right? And somehow making ourselves wrong if we take an extra hour of sleep. And really, that is it's the renourishing, isn't it? We have to regenerate. Our physical cells regenerate when we sleep. So, no surprise that our mind is refreshing itself too at the same time. So.
Yeah. Or cat naps. You do something intense and then you go and lie down for 10 minutes and your brain puts it together. It's like, it's such a shortcut.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought to remind ourselves that it's okay to take those little breaks, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like you, I have discovered that no, this is not a time waster. This is actually a time generator, because I'm so much more productive when I give myself those little rest breaks. And if I'm tired in the middle of the afternoon, then take a break. Right? Yeah. So I've designed my life this way so that I can, right? And then somehow we start to have that conversation with ourselves that says, well, I'm not allowed to. Oh, why not? Why not? Your body is telling you, your mind is telling you, stop for a moment, take a rest.
Absolutely.
So, are there favorite elements that you like to include in sleep spaces?
Well, again, I don't do sort of it's very personal. Everything that I do is very, very personal. The design psychology and the channeling background and really the interior architecture background, as all move towards that idea that we all have such different space needs, place needs, material associations. For some person, that sort of Zen space is going to be really, really nurturing and really, really calming. And there is something true about having low stimulation, right? There's something, important about that. And for other people, that they don't feel contained enough. They don't feel grounded enough. They don't feel secure enough because the environment that they are naturally attuned to, not just because of their past, but because of who they are, might have much more activity going on. And so when I'm looking at someone about their space, I'm really exploring what was it, what objects, what elements really cue them into the space of nurturing, and what assumptions they're making, what shoulds they've got going for them. And a lot of people, I've noticed this since I've started working on spaces, a lot of people, their first impulse when an interior arch or interior designer comes in is to start apologizing for their space.
Yeah.
And
I've been guilty of that.
I'm so sorry, I should have this. And I'm like, no, man, you don't. There are no shoulds. This is life. It's messy. It's in process. It's about accepting you. And until you can start from that part of like accepting yourself, I don't think that you can actually make that changes. You can't make a top-down change. You have to sort of make a change that flows naturally out of yourself where you resonate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
interesting that you've talked about the shoulds now a couple of times. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in my work too, I talk often about inviting people to listen for that word,
Right.
and that word is a signal that there's something not aligned, right?
Exactly.
Right. And it's this idea that somehow we're listening to somebody else's playbook, or, and we're saying, well, if only I was this, then I would be doing this, or I would have that, or it would be this way, or I would be able to do this. And it's interesting that you find that that's true even in space, right? In the conversation about space, and listening for that to give you clues to where to go next.
Exactly. And I think that women, especially, men too, I mean, my husband has it as well. We have such a cultural baggage about our environments. We are the keepers of the home. Yes. And it's a judgment. We feel like we are being, and sometimes we are being judged about how our house looks when people come into it. That goes back, that's a historical thing where cleanliness is really associated with virtue. Mm-hmm. And when we have a messy space, we are not feminine people. We're not good.
Right. We're not doing what it is we should do. Right.
It's very, very deep.
As that, that leader of the home.
Yes.
Yes.
Even if we're working outside of the home as much as our partners.
Yeah, and it's interesting that somehow what I have seen for myself and for others is that somehow if I can't do that, mm-hmm. then I can't measure up in any other way.
Exactly.
Right? That somehow that's the kingpin.
Exactly.
Right? I can be, as successful as the next person, and even more so in a professional career. And if my home isn't reflective of whatever that vision is that I have of the way it's supposed to be, then that undermines my success at every other level.
Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting observation. And, what a beautiful thing it is that you have stepped into being in a place of supporting women to move through that. Mm-hmm. Because it's not just about, right? Because it's not just about dressing up the space. It's about them coming to terms with who they are, what they want, and how that can be represented in whatever the surroundings are for the given time.
Right. And the structure too, because I think, we're working a lot with artists, right?
Yes.
And creatives, and there's that process that also comes in with our natural flows. It's like some people create this way and some people create that way.
Yes.
And not only do I look for like a story that reflects them in the materials, but I also look for a structure, a physical structure that supports that particular process, so that we're actually making room, physical room, for the things that you need to do in order for you to be successful. Yeah. So there's a practical aspect, and there's a visual storytelling aspect, and all sorts of parts.
Yeah.
Which makes it fun,
Yes, exactly. So, and you get to weave all those pieces together. And I think it's fun too that it didn't even catch my ear at first, but the idea that you have been, I don't know if you're still practicing at all as a textile artist, this idea of weaving, right?
Yes, and I do. I would love to be practicing more. Yes. But I've done a weaving for my graduate school. I actually went to Italy and did a weaving intensive in Florence.
Yummy.
Old looms. Where they still make like what is that? Valentine and Gucci, those people's like velvets, high-end brocade velvets for like the royalties' wedding dresses and stuff like that. That's where they make it out of, on these old 100-year-old looms, which are the predecessors of computers, the Jacquard looms. Yeah. So yes, I am still a textile artist.
Love that. Yeah, it's fascinating that the whole process of weaving to me, and I love the kinesthetic part of it.
I love it.
And when I was in college, believe it or not, I had a suite mate because where I was at school, we had a large agricultural school that was part of the state program. And I had a suite mate whose family would ship her wool from her farm sheep, and she had a spinning wheel in her dorm room. And she taught us all how to spin.
That's
and we would
awesome.
sit and card wool with her. And, you know, it was the craziest thing. Half of my suite mates were from Manhattan. They'd never even seen a sheep.
Yeah. Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
So it was just the funniest thing. And here she was, every day she'd get up and she'd card wool and she'd pull it and she'd spin and then she'd knit. And I'll just never forget that. I'll never forget that. It was the coolest experience. Really, really fun.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then later on, I got fascinated by the possibilities of creating yarn, if you will, by things other than wool or fabric. So stretching t-shirt material, weaving paper. I've crocheted with plastic bag yarn, plarn, you know, all of that stuff. What else might I twist and turn and pull and turn into a string so that it could then do something interesting? And yeah, that still calls me a little bit. I don't get to play with that as much as I would like to. So thank you for triggering that memory and encouraging me to think about, gee, where might I fit that in a little bit?
It's good for the brain too. That sort of stuff is very good for the brain.
Now, I will admit that I am not one to do the complicated knit stitches. I can't, the counting and all of that is too much for me. I want to be able to just feel my way through it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it has to be a pretty simple stitch process. Otherwise, I get frustrated by the fact that I've dropped a stitch or missed something or the pattern's mixed up and I have to just give it up. But
this is actually reminding me of when I went because I went back to interior architecture school and got my graduate degree when I was 40, which was 10 years ago. So I went back late in life. And it's I had no idea what a grueling process it was going to be. And so I went out and I bought the most luscious mohair green yarn that I could find. I busted out and I just would knit. I would just knit. And then I would unravel it, and then I would knit again. It was just so that I could have that physical, without having to use my mind and think the stitches and anything like that. It's just, I'm just going to knit now, you know, and that soothed me. That rhythm soothed me because it was such a stressful process for me.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I have a couple of friends who carry little bags with them everywhere they go, and every chance they get, they're pulling out their knitting and they're working on it. And you know, when it happens, it of course triggers the grandma memory, right?
Right.
But I've totally let that one go, and am completely in awe of them being able to sit quietly and just do this thing that feels good. And I was actually in a program, teaching in a program, Creative Expressions, where they made an exception for one of the women. Normally, we wouldn't have allowed people to bring distracting things in while they were doing this other work. And the therapist at the program determined that this woman could knit because it significantly reduced her anxiety.
Yep.
And, you know, and so they said, you know, it's actually better for her to bring it in. She'll pay more attention if she's able to do this while she's sitting there. And so they were able to make an exception for her to do that. And it served her. It really, really served her. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Very, very cool. So we also... you and I had a little bit of a conversation about one of the questions that I love to ask everybody is if you could be a super being. You know, if you want to be an action hero, what would you be? Please share with the audience, our listeners, your superhero character.
The superhero, and I've said this for years actually, because somebody asked me this a while ago and told me this story about somebody who said this is a horizontal surface woman. So that when I walk into a room, horizontal surfaces, tables, beds, etc., would magically be cleared. That would be my superpower. I would be very powerful.
It's starting with my space here, right? You can see that I have a little resistance to clear horizontal space.
Which is part of the creativity. They really do know that people who are creative have messier desks. Yeah. And they really do know, actually the reverse is true too, is that people who have messy desks are more creative, like they think more creatively. Did you know that study has been done?
Yes. Yeah, I just recently saw it. It resurfaced on Facebook not too long ago too. Yeah, and that being said, I did a video not too long ago where I talked about the value of order in that creative energy, and the example I gave was a couple of things happened when I moved into this smaller space. I used to have access to a 2,000 square foot warehouse full of repurposed creative materials. So I never had to keep anything in my space. It was a creator's dream not to have a whole garage full of your own stuff. I could just go to the center anytime I wanted, and I could take whatever I needed. And because I don't create generally with specifics in mind, I like to start with the materials and then see what they turn into. That served me. And I knew what was generally there all the time. Now that space doesn't exist anymore, I have to hold on to some of my own supplies. And I'm in a small apartment and I'm sharing an office with my partner, Bill. So I only have half of a room and half of a closet to keep things for vision boards and all kinds of other things. So I ended up with a shelf, one of those standard wire shelves. And what I did was to put all of my supplies in little clear plastic shoe boxes.
That's what I did too.
Yeah, and now all I have to do is make sure that when I come back from an event, generally we clean up pretty well, but when I come back from an event, just make sure that the glue's in the glue bin and the scissors are in the scissor bin and the tissue's in the tissue bin and the yarn's in the yarn bin. And then the other beautiful rule of all of that is, if it starts to overflow, it goes away. Because I don't need more than what's in those boxes, because I'm generally not doing workshops for 100 people. I'm doing workshops for 20. Right. And I only need, so much. But it is one of those sort of process through things for me as a creative to come to this awareness that order doesn't necessarily have to be stifling. Exactly. In fact, in this case, it makes it so I can grab and go, and I'm more willing to do more workshops because it's not hard to set them up. Because I just look at my shelf, I grab the 6 bins, I put it in my little handy carrier, and off I go. So I think it's interesting to see how we all get to evolve in that awareness as well over time.
Yeah.
And, and I imagine that is a lot of how you support some of your creative clients too.
Some of them, it's a real issue. I think also that I'm very interested in the idea, and this might be more philosophical, but order and its relationship to beauty, and that beauty is actually a form of order. So when something is, and we're not talking sparse, we're not talking that kind of like minimalist structure. Does not have to be that way. I mean, if that's your gig, then that and feels good for you for all sorts of reasons, and that's great. And that when I have a bin that is organized with the stuff in it that I need, there is a beauty that's involved. That there is. One of my favorite quotes, it's not really a quote, but it's a story, is from Alice Walker. I read it years and years ago. in Our Mother's Garden. Have you ever read that book?
Oh, I haven't. I'll have
It's
to add that one to our resources.
yeah, it was a long, long time ago, but it's still one that I quote and I think of. And she was describing, what was it like for slaves who were artists, to have that
Wow.
creative impulse, that need for order and beauty, and to be in such a situation where you have no resources or any access or time or anything like that. I mean, if I break plates because I haven't been able to create, how is that for someone else who's in such an oppressed situation? And her description was describing the way that that a woman might, I wish I could remember the exact way she put it, but arrange preserve jars, like jars of preserves of food in a pantry, with the colors being put in a certain way. It's like anything that you have the capacity to touch, to create that order that's beautiful, that beauty that is order, is where you're going to put, where that's going to be expressed.
Yeah.
And it would be nicer that it's expressed, in this free space, right?
Yes.
But just looking at recognizing that these are the artists. These are the artists who are in this situation, still being artists. And whenever I really get frustrated with the nature of the world, I'm like, and yet artists will continue to be born.
Yes.
There's nothing anyone can do about that. They will continue to be born again and again, and that is going to save the world more than anything.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one.
That's absolutely. A hallelujah.
It sure is. Amen, sister. That's great. And artists will continue to be born. Yeah, and what comes up for me is then this expression of what an artist is, right? That complete expansion of all things, and the continual exploration and recreation, and just the energy of that, I think is it's a real feel good, it's a real feel good.
And I would say that when I think of artists, just thinking about it now, it is about ordering, and we have this idea that ordering is this sort of stifling thing. Mm-hmm. That's a should. That's a total somebody else's idea of what order is. And when someone gets critical about artists, they're always disorganized. They're always staring out windows and not doing productive things. It's like, actually, that is an order. That is an order. And if it's harsh and you're mellow, then that's fine. You can leave.
Right.
But this is how we process. This is what we're creating right now.
Yeah. And we're seeing all that is, and touching and feeling and breathing and experiencing all of that, and then bringing that in and translating it in some very unique personal way. And I think that's the beauty of that is we're gifted with, and I believe we're all gifted with the ability to do that. We express it in a variety of different ways, and some of us just have never been given permission.
Exactly.
And so our histories and our experiences are telling us it's not okay for whatever reasons. So so much of why I'm having these conversations is to engage the people, particularly women, who have seen a little glimmer of that spark of creative energy, and who somewhere along the way were told, no, that's not okay. And now are beginning, under a new set of circumstances, to have the sense that, well, maybe I could just test this a little bit. Maybe I could just see. And my experience is that that's all it takes, just that little bit of let me see, and then carving out places and spaces for that creation to take flight. Yeah. And so I love that what you've been sharing with us is how to really honor that, that the spaces and places for this creation to take flight is necessary, because we don't, although it's possible for me to sit on a bus and create, it's it's a lot more likely to do it in a space that feels like it's been designed for that, right? And that it's holding space for me to bring to it whatever it is that's intended to be born.
Or, or a number of spaces. Like, we don't need to limit it to one. We can create on a bus, and we can create at home, and we can create in a coffee shop, and it's really okay.
Yes.
It's really,
yes. Yeah, I was just having the conversation. I facilitate a group for, it's called the Content Creators Club. And some people are writing books. Some people are trying to get their emails out every week. Some people are writing poetry and creating memes and visuals and doodles. And so it's just about whatever it is that, assuming I'm in a place where I want to message in some way to an audience, we come together once a week to do that. And one of the things we were talking about is that, some days my space just doesn't feel like the place I want to be. And so it's okay to pick myself up and go to Panera, or go to the library, or go to the beach, or go sit in my car.
Exactly.
It doesn't, it can be anywhere. And sometimes we need that shift of energy for whatever reason. So yeah, it's one of the other things that I've been doing with a friend of mine, Gail Butters-Cohen, who's been a guest on this podcast. She and I have been doing some creating that started out on her kitchen counter. Mm-hmm. And the objective was to showcase that it's possible without a ton of supplies, without a fancy studio, without all of that, that as long as you had a little container that you could keep a few of your things in, and you had a way to cover up a surface so that you could put your paper out, or even I was painting on the back of the cereal box, you could create. And that energy I really love to support, because as you say, yes, it's beautiful when we have the space, and yes, we want to be sure to honor that the space is important. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, if I can carry with me, and I just love the paintbrushes now that have the water in the end. So you can take them anywhere. And with a little thing of watercolors about this big, and one paintbrush and a couple of little squares of paper, I can keep myself entertained in a space that's smaller than I am.
And it's important to not wait for perfection. It's important to not wait for everything to be in place, because I do think that one of the things that's very interesting is I'm not a big believer in what I consider like top-down interior design. Is that I'm really working with a person to uncover their blocks and their blind spots, but placemaking is a natural process. That placemaking emerges from us, and that the things that we do, the actions that we do when we're aligned with ourselves, or when we're exploring, maybe we're not aligned with ourselves and achieve perfection, but we're exploring who we are, those are all safe things to do. I mean, it's a space, it's like, don't get intimidated. You could paint the whole place black, and if it didn't work, you could paint it a different color, and at that point that black might not work for you, but you wouldn't have known that before that. So it's all this process. And that's really how, architecture in space used to be created before. It's like you would put the door where the sun came.
Yes.
And then when you had that first room, you realize, well, I want it in relationship. I want to be able to see the barn. So I'm going to put a window there, and I'm going to build another room. And it was this very evolving. Cities too, that's how they were created. Very evolving process based on the actions, the everyday actions that people took.
Yes. I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's one of the things that I notice most, and just kind of makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck. And it came from all my years in hospitality. One of the things I could never understand, because I spent a lot of time traveling throughout the Caribbean, a lot of beautiful places. And I would step through the front entrance of a hotel, and if I didn't know it was in the Caribbean, I could have just as well been in Chicago.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, this is crazy. This is not what I want to experience when I come to a place like this. I want to walk through the entrance and see the ocean, experience the beauty of the place. Mm-hmm. And it just always surprised me that somehow we had decided that it was more important to have this standardized formula of a structure that could be put in as many different places as possible.
Yeah.
And I also love that you touched on this idea of the evolution of things, that this and the that it's coming from the bottom up. It's experience of, because I think so often we get stuck in the, well, if I can't have it be the House Beautiful version, then I guess I'm just stuck. I'm just not going to be able to do anything with this space. And that's so not true, right?
Yeah.
So not true.
Yeah, it's paralyzing sometimes.
Yeah. And there we have our shoulds, right? Yeah. So thankfully we have you to support us to process through some of that and recognize, and for you to lead us to, as you shared in the very beginning, the 3 key pillar things that you offer to your clients as things that can be done immediately without a lot of resistance, without a lot of pomp and circumstance, if you will. And I think that's it's refreshing to hear your approach, because I know it hasn't necessarily been my story, because I've never been in the space of, my history is resistance to the House Beautiful. So that's something
right.
for us to, the rebel in me has always been the opposer. So it's interesting for me to notice that creates its own blocks, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I've dealt with that in people before, for sure.
Yeah. So that's my story that I have to work with, is that, and certainly my mother will remind everyone of the bad news boyfriends I had that were in resistance to having one, right? But the idea that we can create a space that serves us without a lot of the formula, I guess. Yeah. I think that's what I was looking for, is that and your experience brings you to a place of being uniquely qualified to support us to really tap into that. Yeah. So I think that's a wonderful place for us to bring our conversation to a close.
Excellent.
There's one other thing that we didn't talk about. This podcast, of course, is called Create.Play.Live. We spent a lot of time talking about the create idea and how you're creating in your life, how you're supporting others to create. I always like to ask my guests to speak a little bit about how play shows up for you, and just to share some fun little story about how that's true and how it informs your life. I think it's particularly relevant. I'm very focused these days on adults playing like children, and because that we have all of these shoulds about play, for sure. So share with us a little bit about how that shows up for you in your life.
Well, I like that you say adults playing like children. I have 2 kids, and they are adults now, really. They're 18 and 20. And they still live with us. My daughter's just graduating now, pretty much. Yeah. And my son is about to go to school. He took 2 years off and traveled. Nice. And so the ongoing, and my husband's about 10 years older than me, so he's 60, right? And the ongoing joke is that he's actually 4. And I don't know if I've got a specific story about it, but the point, because it's fairly ongoing, and I also my extended family is also very playful, and the reason that my partner and I ended up together is because we could make each other laugh as much as we do. And you know, I can't even, so much of it is like just visual that it's really hard to describe the situation. But we play pretty much all the time, and sometimes it's like, so the story that keeps coming to mind, and I'll try and translate it, and I don't know if it will, but somebody was driving someone to the airport, and my son was driving, and my daughter and I were behind. I was at the back, my husband was in front of me, somebody else was in the front seat with my son and the dog, because the dog had to come with us to the airport, according to my husband. It's like, the dog has to go too, right? And so my son, who's a fantastic driver, is driving, and we're pulling up, and my husband's got the dog's ears pulled up, and he's going to Conrad, my son. He's saying, Conrad, look at the dog, look at the dog. Which is, you know, what you're not supposed to do when somebody's driving, especially if it's your son. It was such like a 4-year-old kind of thing. And my daughter, who's sitting behind, is like, Dad, you are so 4. He's like, yes, no one's paying attention to me. You know, I need you to pay attention to the dog. Yes. So that is a fairly common experience in our life, and it's way nicer than taking things seriously. I can't even imagine living in a household where everyone was so quiet and serious all the time.
Yeah.
Nuts.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I've actually had women in my sphere of influence ask me and say, since I started speaking pretty boldly about play, they've actually come back and said, well, I'm not even sure what that
looks like. Yeah.
I'm not even sure what that looks like, particularly when I say one of the specific rules of making it play is that there's no intention or purpose for it, right? Yeah. It's spontaneous, or it's about the process. It's not about the outcome. So it's not competitive, and it's not that. So pulling on the dog's ears and making funny face and distracting your family, that's a perfect example of just randomness that is silly and makes people smile and feels good. And that's really, we need so much more of that in our lives, I think.
Yeah, and I would like to point out too, just because we've talked a little bit about it before, it's like, it does not make my house clean.
Yeah.
Just so you know, I do not have a clean house.
Yes.
And we, going through raising kids and going through, because we're both entrepreneurs. My husband has a wild mushroom business. Going through that, where we're very busy, we're very creative, we're very involved. It's really actually okay to give the kids shovels, pots and pans, and let them turn the hose on in the backyard.
And get as messy and muddy as they want to.
And we still have holes in our backyard from that experience, and there's no perfection here. We have a much messier house because spontaneously, let's go camping this weekend.
Yes.
And that's going to be what we remember. It's not going to be, okay, everyone clean the house, thank God, right?
Thank you so much for sharing that, because, I'm right there with you. My daughter's favorite place to play when she was a little girl was in a kitchen cabinet that I had designated for her. She would literally crawl in it. And then she had pots and pans that were hers to play with in there. And she could have a whole playpen full of toys, and the place she wanted to be was in that kitchen cabinet. Absolutely. And the things ended up on the floor and disorganized, and they got pushed out of the way, and at some point we put them back in. Not the end of the world for the pots and pans all not to be in a nice, neat little order in the cabinet. So I think my hope for everyone is that we begin to acknowledge and nurture that piece of ourselves that says, when I feel like letting go like that, I turn off the voice that says, well, but something's going to be out of order if I do, or well, but what will the neighbors think, or
Exactly.
right? And so my hope is that we all learn to be in a space where we can let some of that go and allow ourselves to feel that the joy of that, because that's really what it's all about, isn't it? The more joy we have in our lives, the happier we all are. And as you started out in the beginning, the idea of helping people to be in the space of continuing to have those experiences, it supports the greater good, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Ripple effect. This ripple effect just goes on and on and on. So thank you so much for being here to share all of this with us. Please tell our listeners how they can get in touch with you, and should they want to learn more or even have the experience. I believe you have this one room program. Tell us about that. Yeah.
So you can go to my website, and that's judithtamarah.com. Tamarah's got an H at the end. There's a newsletter you can sign up for. It's spontaneous, the newsletter.
Yay.
And I offer this thing that's called a Fresh Look session, which is actually super fun for me to do. It's done online. All my work is done online. And the Fresh Look session is a complimentary session for you to understand what it is that I do. And you bring whatever key problem. It could be order. It could be, color. It could be, I'm feeling smushed, whatever. Even if you can't articulate it, bring it there to me. And we spend about half an hour problem solving. That's all it is, so that you can understand who I am and I can understand who you are. And it's fun. It's really fun for me. I mean, and I think it's been very helpful for other people. I've gotten a lot of feedback that it was like, there are simple things we can do. And the one room program, which is the program that I do, is, as it says, one room. So we focus on one room. We get clear about what your outcomes are that you want. And for example, it could be you want to be more creative. It could be that you want to make more money. It could be that you want to have financial security. It could be that you want greater flow in your life, more self-nurturance, whatever it is. We get very clear about what your final outcome is. And then I take you through a process that involves design psychology and a lot of my intuitive skills and a lot of my interior design skills. And I come up with a design that can be implemented easily for an active, evolving person. And that's the 3 big moves where I really find those 3 moves that are going to make the most significant change or shift in the energy. And then I give about 90 days of implementation support. So during those 90 days after the design has been presented, you can call me and say, how do I find this? Or where do I do this? Or how do I do this? Or I'm having all of these feelings, talk me off the wall. That sort of a thing. And I will do that for 90 days so that you actually get the design into your place so that it can affect you, that it can help you.
Beautiful.
The Fresh Look session you can sign up for on my website. That's, Judith Tamarah. I think that's going to be in the links as well.
Yes, absolutely. That'll all be in the show notes and the resources. Yes.
Excellent. And just sign up. There's a scheduler. It's easy peasy. And the one room program, if you're interested, then just talk to me about it and we'll go from there.
Oh, I'm so glad to be sharing this with our audience, and thank you for bringing your gifts to our show and your stories and your smile. And yeah, I'm going to take away a little bit of playful energy today, I think, and some real thoughts about space and place and creation and what it takes, and really appreciate you being here to share all of this with our listeners. And with that, I will say goodbye and thank you. Much appreciated, Judith, that you joined us. And
And thank you to you. I really, really had fun talking. This has been wonderful.
Good. I'm glad. That's always my hope. And until we gather again for our next conversation, I'm sure that Judith, if you'll be our guest again, I would be happy to have you join us at some time in the future. And we will continue these conversations until we don't. So
how true is that?
Yeah, exactly. So thank you all. And with that, I will say goodbye for now. This is Nanette Saylor, your host, with my beautiful guest, Judith Tamarah. And this is the Create, Play, Live podcast. We will see you all on the next show. And until then, stay curious, my friends. Bye.
Bye.